Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into the life of a pretty key figure in early Islam today, Uthman ibn Affan.
Uthman ibn Affan, yeah,
He was the third caliph,
right.
but he's also got this really interesting title, Du al-Nurayn,
Possessor of the two lights.
which is because he was married to two of the Prophet Muhammad's daughters.
Yeah, not just one, but two.
So we're going to be looking at some excerpts about his life, his achievements, his legacy, the whole thing, all the good stuff.
One thing that's often missed about Uthman is that even before he converted to Islam,
Okay.
he was known for being really pious, really generous.
Uh-huh.
And that's even though he was born into a wealthy Meccan family.
So he wasn't like a recent convert or someone who, discovered faith later in life.
No, not at all.
He was one of the very first.
One of the very first.
Mhm.
Exactly. Which says a lot about his conviction.
Yeah, that's a good point. It wasn't just circumstance or, being born into it. There was something in him that was drawn to this new faith very early on. Let's talk about those marriages.
Okay.
Two of the Prophet's daughters. That's a unique situation, to say the least.
Definitely.
What were the social implications of that, especially when you think about this brand new Muslim community that's forming?
Well, these marriages were actually really pivotal.
I can imagine.
Back then it was such a time of change and uncertainty.
Right. Everything's new.
And by marrying into the Prophet's family,
Yeah.
Uthman wasn't just making a personal commitment, it was also deeply symbolic.
Right.
And it really helped to solidify the early Muslim community.
Yeah, so there was a strategic element to it.
Oh, definitely. A strategic alliance, no doubt.
Uh-huh.
But the sources also really emphasize Uthman's devotion to his wives,
Oh, interesting.
especially his first wife, Ruqayya.
Okay. So it makes you think about the weight of those relationships, both personally and politically.
Yeah. It was a lot to carry, for sure.
Because after Ruqayya passed away, he married her sister, Kulthum,
Right.
further solidifying the connection to the Prophet.
Exactly.
But how did he transition from, being the son-in-law
Yeah.
to becoming the Caliph?
That's a great question.
It wasn't an automatic inheritance, right?
No, not at all.
So what were the qualities that led to him being chosen as the leader?
Well, it wasn't just the family ties. He had already
Yeah.
built this reputation for being just and fair.
Okay.
And he was also known for seeking counsel.
From others.
Yeah, from his advisors.
Yeah.
Taking a measured approach to leadership.
So not just making decisions in a vacuum.
No, not at all.
Interesting.
Their sources describe him as someone who truly cared about the well-being of the entire community.
He sounds like the kind of leader who valued consensus, deliberation.
Very much so.
Are there any stories, any anecdotes that sort of show that in action, something that illustrates his approach to leadership?
There's this one story about a dispute
Okay.
between a wealthy man and a poor man. It's a really good example of his sense of justice.
What happened?
Well, the wealthy man, he accused the poor man of something. But Uthman ruled in favor of the poor man,
Really?
even though they were from completely different social standing.
Yes.
And that shows, his commitment to fairness, regardless of wealth or influence.
It's one thing to say you believe in justice. It's another thing to actually uphold it, especially when it goes against those societal norms.
Exactly.
So, as Caliph, Uthman's in charge during this massive expansion of the Islamic Empire.
Right, huge growth.
That must come with its own set of challenges.
Absolutely, yeah. Managing a rapidly growing empire is never easy.
No, I can imagine.
Think about it. Diverse cultures, new territories. You need new systems of governance.
Yeah.
It takes a leader who can adapt, think strategically.
Someone who can think on their feet.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that in the middle of all of this,
Yeah.
Uthman achieves something incredible.
Okay. What is it?
He standardizes the Quran.
Wait, you're saying that before Uthman, there were different versions of the Quran going around?
Yeah, circulating. Imagine the potential for confusion.
And conflict. I mean, you have different versions of such an important text. That could lead to all sorts of problems.
You're exactly right. Misinterpretations, disagreements.
Yeah.
Uthman recognized this danger,
Makes sense.
and he saw the need for a unified, authoritative text
Yeah.
to protect the integrity of the faith.
So how did he do? I mean, was it like a massive ancient editing project?
Kind of.
Yeah.
He put together a committee of experts,
Okay.
and they meticulously collected all these different fragments and versions,
Wow.
compared them.
Had to make some tough decisions, I bet.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They had to figure out which variations to include.
Which ones were accurate?
Exactly.
And the result.
The Uthmanic Codex.
That's the version of the Quran.
that Muslims still use today.
All over the world.
All over the world. It's pretty remarkable.
It's incredible to think about the impact of that decision, over 1,400 years ago. And it's still affecting people's lives today.
It really is.
But you mentioned all the challenges of managing this massive empire. Did Uthman do anything specifically to address those, apart from the whole Quran project?
He did.
I mean, what about just the practical day-to-day of running a territory that big?
He was very pragmatic,
Okay.
He invested heavily in infrastructure, roads, waterways, connecting this vast empire.
It's not just about conquering land, is it?
Not at all. It's about connecting it, making it work.
Right, making it functional.
Exactly.
So he was thinking about trade,
Of course.
communication, keeping everyone connected over those huge distances.
That's all part of the plan.
It sounds like Uthman was juggling a lot: spiritual leader, administrator, empire builder.
Yeah, he had his hands full.
But I have a feeling it wasn't all smooth sailing. Right?
Well, history is rarely that simple.
No, it's never that easy.
And Uthman's story definitely had its share of bumps along the way.
And those bumps, those challenges.
That's where we'll pick up next time.
That's where we'll pick up next time on our deep dive. So last time we were talking about how Uthman's time as Caliph, it wasn't always easy.
Oh yeah, definitely not a walk in the park.
It makes sense though, right? Someone leading such a large, diverse empire, there's bound to be some pushback.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. You're going to have people who disagree, who want things done differently.
So what were some of the main points of contention, the things that people really took issue with during Uthman's rule?
One of the big criticisms was that he showed favoritism towards his own clan, the Umayyads.
Oh, okay. So like playing favorites with his own family.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when it came to giving out important positions.
Like government roles and stuff.
Exactly. And that led to some groups feeling left out.
Feeling like they didn't have a voice.
Yeah. Marginalized, excluded.
Which, you can see how that would breed resentment.
Oh, absolutely.
It's interesting because that whole accusation of nepotism, it pops up again and again throughout history.
It's a classic, isn't it?
It makes you wonder, was there any truth to it? Or was it just a way for Uthman's rivals to discredit him?
Well, you know how it is with historical accounts.
Yeah.
There are always different perspectives, different interpretations of the same events.
So what do the sources say?
Some historians suggest that Uthman genuinely believed his relatives were the best people for the job.
Okay, so maybe he thought they were the most qualified.
Right. But others believe he was more focused on consolidating power.
Keeping it all in the family.
Yeah, which, as we know, can backfire pretty spectacularly.
Yeah, that doesn't always work out so well. So it's not a simple answer, then.
Nope. History rarely is. It's a reminder that we're dealing with complex human beings here.
With their own motivations and ambitions.
Exactly.
Were there any other big criticisms that contributed to the discontent?
Yeah, another issue was money.
Money, always money.
Some people thought Uthman was being way too generous.
With what? Like the treasury?
Exactly. The Treasury. They questioned his spending, certain projects, certain individuals.
So accusations of mismanagement.
Oh, yeah. Even corruption.
So basically, the classic financial scandal.
Pretty much.
But it's important to remember those are accusations.
Right, not necessarily the whole truth.
It does seem like all that rapid expansion, all those changes, they created a lot of tension, a lot of suspicion.
Oh, absolutely. Governing an empire that big, that diverse,
Yeah.
incredibly complex, bound to be disagreements on how things should be run.
Who gets what?
Exactly.
And how the money is spent.
Of course,
Yeah.
you've got all these different groups with their own interests.
And those disagreements, sometimes they can turn into something more serious.
Unfortunately, yes. Especially when people feel like the leader isn't being fair.
That they're being ignored.
Right.
So how did Uthman react to all this criticism? Did he try to address it, or did he just ignore it?
From what we can tell from the sources, he tried to find some middle ground.
Okay.
He didn't just dismiss the criticism outright.
So he was willing to listen.
It seems so, yeah. He talked to people, tried to appease them.
But he also defended his decisions.
Oh, yeah, he still believed he was doing what was best for the Muslim community as a whole.
Sounds like a tough balancing act. Trying to be firm but flexible.
Exactly.
Convinced of your own choices. But also open to compromise.
Yeah, it's a classic leadership dilemma. But sometimes, no matter how hard you try,
Yeah.
it's not enough.
To quell the unrest.
Exactly.
And that kind of brings us to the darker chapter in Uthman's story.
Right.
We know it doesn't end well.
Unfortunately not.
But before we get to his assassination, we need to understand who these rebels were
Yeah. What were their motives?
What were they fighting for?
Well, those grievances we talked about.
Yeah.
The favoritism, the money issues.
They definitely played a role.
A big role. It's important to remember, though, when we're talking about Uthman's assassination,
Yeah.
the historical accounts, they can be pretty messy.
Messy how?
Well, there are often conflicting interpretations, possible biases.
So we need to be careful about taking things at face value.
Exactly. We have to look at these accounts with a critical eye.
And understand that there were probably multiple motivations at play.
Absolutely.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle.
A puzzle where some of the pieces are missing.
And the ones we have might be faded or even broken.
Exactly. We do our best to reconstruct the events.
But we can't pretend we have the complete picture.
Exactly.
So based on what we do know, what can we say about these rebels?
The sources point to a mix of people.
Okay.
Different groups, individuals, all dissatisfied with Uthman in one way or another.
So some might have had legitimate concerns.
Yeah, genuine grievances.
While others
might have been more opportunistic.
maybe saw a chance to grab some power for themselves.
It wouldn't be the first time in history.
No, definitely not. It's fascinating how one event can be seen so differently,
Isn't it?
even centuries later. It reminds us that history isn't always simple or clear-cut.
Nope, not at all. It's a mix of ambition, faith, personal grudges, political maneuvering.
Like a big, messy tapestry.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And in Uthman's case,
Yeah.
all those threads, they come together in this tragic act of violence.
That would change the course of Islamic history.
Absolutely.
So, despite his piety,
Mm-hmm.
his accomplishments, his attempts to lead with justice and fairness,
Yeah,
Uthman's reign ends in violence.
it does.
He's besieged in his own home in Medina
Right, in his own home.
and assassinated in 656 CE.
A tragic end.
I can only imagine the shockwaves that sent through the empire.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Uthman's death marked the start of a very turbulent period.
The first fitna.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Years of conflict and strife.
Which really tested the foundations of the Islamic Empire.
It did.
Yeah.
But even though his time as caliph ended in tragedy,
Yeah.
Uthman's influence, his impact on Islam, it didn't end there.
Which brings us to his legacy. How is Uthman ibn Affan remembered today in the Muslim world? What aspects of his life continue to resonate, even centuries after his death?
Well, that's a great question. And it's one we're going to explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back after a short break. So we've spent the last two parts really digging into the life and times of Uthman ibn Affan.
Piety, leadership, expansion, controversies, his assassination, whole 9 yards.
And now I want to get into his legacy. Like, how does all of that translate into how he's remembered? What's his lasting impact on Islam? How does the Muslim world view him today?
You know, it's interesting. Even with all the controversies and, of course, the tragic way his reign ended, Uthman is largely seen in a positive light.
Really?
Yeah, he's widely revered. As a righteous leader, definitely. A devoted companion of the Prophet, and probably most importantly, as a key figure in preserving the Quran.
Right, that makes sense. I mean, that decision to compile the Quran, standardize it, it affects the lives of Muslims all over the world to this day.
For sure. It's hard to even imagine what Islam would look like today without that unified text.
Yeah, it's like he prevented the faith from fracturing.
Exactly. Think about it. All those different versions floating around.
Yeah.
The potential for misinterpretations, disagreements.
It could have easily led to division within the faith.
Right. But Uthman saw that danger.
And he stepped in.
He created this one authoritative version and essentially laid the groundwork for a shared religious experience that could transcend all those boundaries, you know?
Geographic, cultural, the whole thing. It's like he created a common ground, a point of unity that could withstand anything, time, distance, all of it.
Exactly.
But his legacy goes beyond the Quran, right? What other parts of his life are people remembering? What do they celebrate?
His personal qualities are a big one.
Like what?
His piety, his generosity. They always talk about his commitment to justice too.
Yeah.
And of course, his devotion to the Prophet and his family.
So he was seen as a model Muslim.
Oh yeah, definitely. He embodied the virtues that, you know, Muslims are supposed to strive for.
It's not just about the things he achieved then, it's about how he lived his life.
Exactly, setting an example.
And you can't forget about his death,
Right.
being assassinated.
A victim of political violence. It solidified his image as a martyr.
That's powerful. It's not just a historical figure anymore.
Right. It becomes about sacrifice. Standing strong even when things are falling apart.
It makes you think about how we understand historical figures,
Yeah.
the way their stories are told, retold.
It shapes everything.
We love narratives of triumph
Yeah.
and tragedy,
And
and Uthman's life has both.
absolutely. And it's a good reminder that history is always being interpreted, through the lens of the present.
How we see Uthman today.
It's influenced by our values, our perspectives, and the stories that have been passed down over the years.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Uthman ibn Affan, what would you say are the key takeaways? What should people remember about him?
I think it's that complexity. His story is full of contradictions.
He was a man of faith. He had huge achievements.
But he also faced those enormous challenges, made tough choices. And of course, it ended in tragedy.
His life kind of shows how complicated leadership can be, especially in a time of such rapid growth and change.
For sure. And it reminds us that history isn't black and white. There are always different sides to the story.
We need to consider all of those different perspectives if we want to understand the past.
Exactly. But beyond all the complexity, I think Uthman's life also shows us the power of faith and the impact one person can have. I mean, his role in preserving the Quran, that continues to shape the lives of millions and millions of people.
And maybe his story also reminds us about the importance of things like unity, justice, and compassion, values that are important no matter what century you live in.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life and legacy of Uthman ibn Affan. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.